Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. So today we're going to continue with the new Game Master Month program. This website takes us through the process of learning a new RPG system in January and running our first session by the end of the month. If you're joining us late, don't worry. It's easy to catch up and still run to schedule if you want, or you can start now and go at your own pace. The posts should remain up on the website all year, I think. But if you can join in January, you can benefit from the community on Facebook and Discord as well. And just before we begin, I want to remind you that most of the groundwork that we're doing now, we only do this once. This is not just prep for your first game, but for all games that you will run in your chosen system. So don't feel like you have this much work to do every time before a session. In particular, the combat in RuneQuest is a little bit difficult to get your head around at the start, but once you get it, then it will be good going forward. Please don't be put off by what we're doing now. You chose a system, an RPG system that appealed to you, so keep going with it because the world always needs more game masters. So check out the website, link to the website in the description below, and let's get started. So encounters are the scenes that take the RPG away from just being a story and turns it into a more interactive experience where the player's choices matter. This is where you present a situation to your players and they decide how they want to proceed. So the website here gives us a few examples of what encounters might be, but really an encounter can be anything. So the examples they give us are: the characters kick down the dungeon door, find a monster within, and fight it to get the treasure. Or the characters are in a busy market when a beggar attempts to pickpocket them. The Duke summons the characters to carry a message of peace to his rival. The characters have come to a rocky ravine in their travels. Is it just a difficult climb, or are there enemies waiting to ambush them while they are vulnerable? The characters break into the office of an erstwhile employer, searching for papers or other evidence of the employer's true motives, and so on. Encounters are how you will spend most of the time in your games. The parts in between encounters generally don't need too much attention. You can kind of speed through them. Things that kind of connect the different encounters, such as traveling from A to B or just time passing. Now, before we get into that, there are a few places where you do want to give these in-between points a little bit of attention and time. For example, when you have a rest at night or something like that, it's good to give the players a little bit of time to flesh out their characters and build the relationships in the group. Also, if you are introducing a new setting to them, for example, in a new fantasy world, describing the world a little bit can help. So when they arrive in a new town, maybe you just describe a little bit what's going on. But, of course, even with this, don't drag it out too long. Don't monologue too long because you want everyone to be involved in this. But generally, anyway, encounters will be the main part of your game. So down here at the bottom, they have a nice hint, I think, or a tip. Generally speaking, the higher the proportion of encounter time to non-encounter time in your game, the better the pacing is likely to feel. So that's all we get for the start. And after listening to encounters, now we're going to do a little bit of a 180. And now we're going to go back and talk about rules for our chosen setting. So for Trail of Cthulhu, we will be reading a little bit more about the mechanics of the game for fighting, stability and sanity loss, and how we recover our points in between and at the end of scenarios. The fighting in Midnight Sub Rosa is fairly simple, so we don't need to know about the really complex rules. So we'll just be picking out the ones that we need to know. And also, we'll have a very brief overview of character creation with this quick reference. So I'm sure we'll go into it in more detail in a future one, but for now, we'll keep it nice and simple. All right, let's head over and read about these rules. So for this session, we're going to be learning about how to fight. We won't be covering all of the obscure rules because Midnight Sub Rosa is pretty simple when it comes to combat, so let's keep it simple in the prep too. So fighting in Trail of Cthulhu follows the same basics of contests which we've gone through before, but they're a little bit more complicated. For close combat, we have three types. Either it's going to be scuffling versus scuffling, scuffling versus weapons, or weapons versus weapons. For firearms versus firearms, the characters will be apart from each other. For close combat, it will just be scuffling or weapons. So the aggressor in the combat is the first one to move against the other. If it's unclear who is doing that, the combatant with the highest pool in the skill that they're using for the fight will go first. So if one person is using scuffling and the other person is using weapons, if this person has higher pool in scuffling than this person has in weapons, this person will go first. So if you remember from our previous video, in normal contests, it's good to go last, but in a fight, it's very, very good to go first. So each investigator will have what's called a hit threshold, and it will be either 3 or 4, depending if they have enough athletics. That hit threshold is the number that their opponent must get to successfully hit the investigator. When it comes to opponents that the investigators are trying to attack, usually humans will have similar thresholds. Sometimes goons will be a little bit lower, but creatures will often have higher hit thresholds, and they're all listed in the stat block. For our purposes in Midnight Sub Rosa, the ghouls have a threshold of 4 or 5 if they are underground. So if you roll equal to your opponent's hit threshold or higher, you will do damage depending on your weapon. So again, to try to hit them, you can use some points. Let's say I'm using a weapon and I want to use 3 points from my pool. Then I'll roll a d6 and add the result of the d6 and my 3 points. Let's say I got a 2. I would now have a score of 5. If that is equal to or higher than their hit threshold, then I'm going to hit. So for damage, you will roll again a 6-sided die and then modify it based on this table here. I was hoping to... can I do it? There we go. So let's imagine I decided to punch a ghoul. And I used 3 points from my scuffling pool and I rolled a 4 on my dice. My attack score would be 7. That is more than the ghoul's hit threshold, so I would do damage. Now I'm going to roll a d6, getting a 3. Because I attacked with my fist, it will also have a modifier of -2. So only 1 point of damage would actually get through to the ghoul. And that 1 point would be deducted from the health pool of the victim. What if you rolled a 1? Can your damage be reduced to 0? Yes, it can, but not below 0. So a punch or a stab is never going to heal the target. Usually when I'm playing, I like to play with a minimum of 1 point damage for each successful hit, but that is a house rule rather than a rule as written. So choose for yourself. Maybe test it out both ways and see which one you like. Some creatures will use weapons that are not listed in this table, and those weapons will be noted in their stat block. So for example, the ghoul's claw has a +1 modifier, while its bite has a +0. So unlike other contests, you don't lose at the first fail. Combat will just keep going until there's a resolution, either trapping someone giving up, incapacitation, or fleeing. So that is the combat for a one-on-one fight. If, however, it's a free-for-all between two groups, the keeper will determine an initiative order, ranking the players and the enemies based on their pool points in the area they'll be starting with. So are they starting with scuffling or weapons or firearms? On your turn, you can attack any enemy in range for your chosen action. After everyone has gone, a new round will start, keeping the same order even if the pool values have changed. This is just kind of for the sake of speed, rather than recalculating it every time. Once the fight has begun, if a combatant wants to do anything other than fight, they move to the very end of the initiative order. And so armor can reduce the amount of damage you take, again down to 0, but not less than that. Depending on the type of weapon it's protecting you from. So for example here, a tin hat reduces damage from bullets and cutting or slashing weapons by 2 points. But if you get hit by a club or some kind of blunt trauma, it only reduces it by 1 point. And it is only effective against headshots. So during a gunfight, there is also an additional consideration. You don't need to know this for Midnight Sub Rosa, but we'll just go through it because it's very simple, really. There are 3 types of cover. One is when you're totally exposed, so you're just out in the open. In that case, your hit threshold is reduced by 1, so it's easier for people to hit you with their guns. The second option is where you have partial cover. So you're not completely covered, but you're not standing completely out in the open as well. For this, in a gunfight, your hit threshold will be unchanged. And finally, you have a full cover. This is where you are completely covered and you only pop your head out to shoot or something like that. Then your hit threshold will be increased by 1, making you more difficult to hit. So for the purposes of this new Game Master Month, we can skip rate of fire and ammo capacity and stuff like that. When it comes to range, there are 4 kinds of range. There's point blank, which is when you're right next to each other, and firearms will do extra damage. There's close, when you're within about 10 yards, kind of in the same room. There's near, when you're about 30 to 40 yards away, and you can, still see them. And then there's long, which is about 100 yards away. And outside of long distance, the opponent will be out of range, even for a rifle. After this, there are some other kinds of damage. It's probably worth giving it a quick kind of flick through, just in case something comes up in your game. Possibly your players, especially in a pulp game, will want to use something like grenades or Molotov cocktails too. So just check that out. But now we're going to get to 2 very important things, which are stability and sanity. So I'm just going to read this here so that you can understand the difference between them. It's this whole column. It's very well written. Stability is mental and emotional resistance to trauma of any kind, natural, human, or supernatural. Think of it as your mental and emotional health pool. Your stability pool is quite likely to dwindle rapidly over the course of a single adventure, but it is also likely to completely refresh between scenarios. It is perhaps best understood as a short-term measure of your current mental health. Sanity is the ability to believe in, fear for, or care about any aspect of the world or humanity as we know it. Religion, science, family, natural beauty, human dignity, even normal immorality. The horrible truth of the mythos is that sanity measures your ability to believe a comforting lie, but a lie necessary in order to live as a human being rather than a soulless tool or plaything of the great old ones. Your sanity will probably erode slowly over the course of many adventures. Unless you see a great old one, lose a pillar of sanity, or suffer a big reveal, you will probably lose only 1 or 2 points from your sanity pool in any given adventure. You may lose none at all, but sanity is slow to return. In purest games, it never comes back at all. It is perhaps best understood as long-term measure of how close you are to fully realizing the bleak and awful reality of the cosmos. In short, your stability pool measures how close you are to snapping today, and your sanity pool measures how close you are to seeing the truth forever. Many things can cause you to lose stability, so think of it as anything shocking, including violence. Make a stability test with difficulty 4, and of course you can spend points from your stability pool for this as well. If you pass, you manage to shake it off, but if you fail, you will lose a certain number of points based on what you see, and there's a table coming up now. For our example in Midnight Sub Rosa, if you see a ghoul, everyone would have to make a standard 4-point stability roll if you see them. If you pass that test, then there will be no loss. But if you fail, let's just have a quick look at this table to see how much stability they would lose. So it depends on how you encounter them. If you just see the ghoul from afar, so you see a supernatural creature from a distance, you would lose 3 points of stability from your pool. If you see them up close, you would lose 4. And if you are attacked by a supernatural creature, you would lose 5. So it's always good to have this page handy, or to have a read through it as well, to kind of have an idea what would cause big sanity losses. So for example, you kill a friend or a loved one or a source of stability. That is really going to mess you up anyway. So as you lose your stability, it doesn't actually have any mechanical difference on your character until they go below 0. But we get a nice sidebar here with suggestions for players how to roleplay different levels of stability loss. So if you just lose 1 or 2 points, you might twitch or stutter, your voice could rise a bit, or you could very explicitly stay in control. But on the other hand, if you were to lose 7 to 8 points, which again might be coming from either seeing a friend or loved one killed in a particularly gruesome manner or killing them yourself, then how are you not shaken yet? You've almost certainly gone into adrenaline shock. Your peripheral vision is gone and your hands and feet are cold. You may babble personal confessions. I've always loved you, Tom. Or just shout incoherent threats. If you can make interpersonal abilities work at all, they work more through fear of what you might do than anything else. So kind of giving you that hint how to role play those sanity losses. So as mentioned in a previous video, players should try to explore more dangerous places and confront their fears. They are here for a horror game, not to play it totally safe all the time. That's not to say that they should be totally reckless either, but they really want to figure out the mystery. And your drive, which we will discuss in a later video, I'm sure, may make you want to do unwise things. So the keeper can use this to kind of convince you to do it. The keeper will tell you when your drive is compelling you to do something. You can either accept it or you can resist it. If you resist it, it will cost you some of your stability because you're going against your own nature or your own drive. So there's 2 different kinds here. If it's a hard driver, which is something that moves the plot along, you will lose either 4 stability points from your pool or a full 1/3 of your stability pool, whichever is greater. If it's something that's a little bit off the main plot, but still connected to your drive, it's called a soft driver. And resisting that will cost you 2 stability points from your pool. But if you decide to follow that hard driver into, maybe danger, you will actually regain 2 stability pool points if you follow a hard driver and 1 stability pool point if you follow a soft driver. So that is how you lose your stability, but what does it mean to lose your stability? So as mentioned before, if your stability is still over 0, your pool is still over 0, you're fine, but you can roleplay it as I mentioned above. If, however, your stability drops down between 0 and -5, you are now shaken. This means that you can't spend points for your investigative abilities, and all general abilities tests, the difficulty will increase by 1. If your stability is between -6 and -11, your mind is blasted. You may develop a mental illness, which you can read about a little bit later, that will persist with your character even once you get out of this range. You also get all of the effects of being shaken above, and you basically can't do anything except run away, do a frenzied attack, or literally stand there doing nothing. When this happens, you permanently lose 1 point of stability rating, not your pool. So your rating is your kind of like your permanent this is how many points I have. This is like my starting points. And the pool is something that you kind of use up and then it refreshes after a scenario or a session or a certain points. But if you are blasted, if your mind is blasted, your starting ones will be permanently reduced by 1. Now, if you actually make it down to -12 or anything less than that, you are incurably insane. Basically, this is the end of your character, but if you want, you can commit one last crazy, self-destructive act. It can be helpful or hindering, whatever you want. So that is stability. Now we'll move on to sanity. There are 2 ways to lose sanity. The first one is if a Mythos shock drops your stability pool to 0 or lower, or if you use the Cthulhu Mythos ability. So your stability going below 0 from non-Mythos shocks does not cause sanity loss. But then you're in a bad way anyway if the Mythos stuff comes along. If you go from a positive or from anywhere, basically, and a Mythos shock brings your stability down to shaken, so between 0 and -5, your sanity rating, and again, your rating, that's your permanent one, will drop by 1 point. If, however, you go down into the -6 to -11 range, your sanity rating will drop by 2 points. If you are using the Cthulhu Mythos, I'll just read this because I think it's well written. Using the Cthulhu Mythos ability to piece together fragments of dissociated knowledge and gain insight into an adventure invites the loss of both stability and, if the discovery is terrifying enough, sanity. You cannot make a test to avoid this loss. The degree of loss does not depend on the number of Cthulhu Mythos pool points spent, if any, but on the nature of the revelation. So just down below, depending on what your revelation is from using the Cthulhu Mythos, you will lose stability and sanity points as explained here in this box. So keepers, just kind of have a look at this to get a vague idea and try to match it up to the situation as best you can. So if you lose 3 points of sanity, you can declare that one of your pillars of sanity, which we'll go through in character creation in a future video, has crumbled. And then this realization should change how you roleplay your character. So there are 2 ways that you can avoid or reduce your sanity loss, either by denying what you're seeing or by fainting. For denial, it is completely at the keeper's discretion, but if there, by the end of the scenario, there is no tangible evidence of what you saw or experienced, you can decide, try to convince yourself it didn't happen. And if you do that, your sanity rating can increase by 1. But if you go down to 0 sanity, there's no coming back from that. Another option is a player may wish to faint upon being presented with a sanity shock. They will lose 1 sanity pool point and be unaffected otherwise, but they can play no more part in the rest of the scene. The keeper can kind of choose anything that happens to the fainted character, but they give 2 guidelines here. 1, if the fate of the fainted investigator is a mystery, say the character went somewhere alone and fainted and nobody knows what happened, or everyone was together, the character fainted, but then everyone else ended up running away. If for some reason the fate of that fainted character is a mystery, the keeper should leave some clues to the solution of the mystery so that the players can, find out at some point. And it doesn't have to be in this adventure, but it could be in future adventures as well. And the second guideline is not to just kill the character, because that's kind of a bit of a cop-out. Rather have them kidnapped and tortured, injected with something, used in a weird experiment, transformed into, a weird creature, something like that. It's a horror game. So then finally we have we have a section on long-term mental illness. and including those which are caused by Mythos madness. I don't expect these to come up in Midnight Sabrosa, but do have a quick flick through them. So finally, just before we look at the character creation overview, we get the end of session recovery. So there's a few ways to recover stability and how to deal with like mental illness issues that you might have picked up. The most mechanically relevant part is refreshing your investigative and general ability pools. So investigative ability pools only recover after each case. So at the start of a case, you have some mystery to solve, and you can use the pool points from your investigative skills throughout that entire mystery, even if it goes over multiple sessions. And then at the end of that case, the pools will refresh. If you've got a longer campaign, for example, Eternal Lies, you can do it by chapter or something like that. For general ability pools, though, these can be refreshed anytime you have a safe haven for an hour or more. You get to choose 3 different general ability pools, and they become completely refreshed, well, up to your rating. But this can only be used once per game session. Also, pools for physical activities such as athletics, firearms, scuffling, weapons, stuff like that, they are all refreshed after every 24 hours. So at the end of a day kind of thing. Everything else will just refresh at the end of a case. The one exception there is the health pool, and that refreshes 2 points per day of fully restful activity, days where you're not doing anything. And then finally, at the end of each case, each player gets 2 build points for each session they participated in. So a 3-session investigation would give 6 build points to participating investigators. So these can be spent on a 1-to-1 basis to improve your investigative or general abilities, but not your credit rating, your Cthulhu Mythos, or your sanity. And if you are playing a fully purist game, for a purist Lovecraftian game, nothing you do can improve your investigator. He is lucky to still be alive, to hold his own after his shattering experiences. The keeper may still allow you to reassign points, which is where you decide, and there's a narrative reason for this. In my investigation, I've kind of started to let my art skill wane, but I've improved my weapons skill. So the very last thing we're doing for Trail of Cthulhu for this session is just looking at the investigator creation quick reference, just a small box here. So it's a quick overview of how to make a character without, actually going through all the steps. So I'll just read through it quickly. And as I said, it's just an overview, so we will go into more detail in a later session, I'm sure. This is just so you get a vague idea how it works. Ask your keeper how the campaign frame affects character creation. Remember, we're using the Armitage Inquiry as our campaign frame. This can, for example, set the number of build points available or give caps on certain abilities. Next, choose your investigator's original occupation. Decide if you still follow it or if you have abandoned your job to become a full-time and likely increasingly impoverished and ostracized uncoverer of Mythos truths. In a one-shot adventure, you may not have time to quit your job. Next, based on your own conception of the investigator's character and backstory, choose your drive. Then spend build points on your abilities, making sure your party as a whole has as many abilities as possible covered. Define the pillars of your sanity and sources of your stability, if your campaign uses them. Choose any context you have. At any point during the process, decide on your investigator's name, birthplace, favorite cigarettes, religious beliefs, or anything else that you think will help you understand and roleplay your investigator. All right, so with that, we've kind of picked up pretty much all of the rules that you will need to run Midnight Sabrosa. So we're doing great. So yeah, I'll join you next time. Probably, I would guess, we're going to be creating characters next time. We're going through that, or else it'll be the next session after that. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.